Is this thing on? Happy Wisdom Wednesday, everyone, and this week's book of the week comes from co-authors Dr. Hazel Markus and Dr. Alana Connor, a good friend of mine, and it's called Clash: 8 Cultural Conflicts That Make Us Who We Are. Now, in the 21st century, who will rule the world? Will it be the disciplined Asians or perhaps Westerners? Will women skyrocket up the corporate ladder and be able to work alongside men, or will they knock them out? Will poor kids outpace rich kids? Who knows? But these are the type of questions that this book starts to cover and unlock. You see, in the world that we live today, my good friend Dr. Alana Connor, when she was in graduate school, realized she noticed something. And what she noticed was that being somebody who grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, things are a little bit different culturally down there as opposed to where she went to grad school at Yale. When she started to dig into this, her and her co-author, Dr. Hazel Markus, who's a pioneer in this field, realized that clashing of cultures comes down to 2 very specific things: the idea of interdependence and independence. So what are those? See, when it comes to being interdependent, it has a lot to do with structures society already have in place. Being relational, similar to one another, and rooted. Things that are based on history, tradition, and of course, not making any new maps, because there's always been a map and we followed it all the time. It's about community and listening to each other and giving each other an equal voice and not trying too much to stand out. While on the other side, when it comes to independent, it has a lot to do with being free, unique, equal but still great, and able to raise a hand when you want, be a little bit different, a little bit creative and unique, and more importantly, being willing to do things on your own, make your own maps, and not just follow anybody else's. So why is this so important? Well, certain cultures, as we see here, emphasize independence, while other cultures emphasize interdependence. And because sometimes those things don't match up, that's when we end up having a clash of cultures, and thus, title of the book. Now, one of the good news is one of these smart human tricks that we do is that we can actually channel what our culture is inside of us to use a variety of interdependence and independence, because we're not just limited to one of those things. But that's also where a lot of conflict comes up, because sometimes when we don't do that, that's when we end up clashing with different cultures. So let's take a couple of good examples and see how that works out. Now, this book was written in 2013, but a lot of the stats that I'm going to present now may have changed, but if anything, it's strengthened the arguments in this book. When we look at women, women earn more advanced degrees. They own or half own about 47% of all U.S. firms, and they hold more professional positions than men. Yet, women only earn 77 cents per every man's dollar. They're 3.6% of the Fortune 500 and are about 17% of the U.S. Congress. And of course, those statistics have changed. And I know what you are thinking, and I agree with you, which is, yes, those differences exist not purely because of the patriarchy or because we have it out for women, but because men and women have different views of success. They may make different decisions, which is true. However, that doesn't avoid the fact that these differences do exist. We have to ask ourselves, why does this exist and how can we make this better? Now, one of the things that's pointed out in this book as to why this happens is that on the male side or men's side, we're not using our interdependent selves, which is we're not rolling out the red carpet and inviting women to come in and partner up with us and enjoy the benefits and values of work. We're not making it any easier. On the women's side, women are not using their independent self. They're not using their ability to insist and push, which is what men usually do. And of course, as a result of that, there's still quite a lot of discrimination. There's rampant harassment. And we have to face up in that these things actually do happen, as much as we don't like to talk about these things. That doesn't mean that it's purely on the fault of the men, but it also doesn't mean that it's purely on the fault of the women. This is a problem that we all own collectively as a group of human beings. At least that's my personal perspective. Now, a great example of this is when it comes to the salary conversation. Men, psychologically, if you look at something like the Big Five, have been shown to be overall a lot more aggressive than women. And because of that, men insist more when it comes to salary, and they're not willing to put up or accept a lower wage. Women, on the other hand, because of their interdependent side, they think about the valuable relationships they have at work, how happy they are, and they try and be much better as team players, and as a result of it, often don't push for a higher salary and walk away with a much less wage because they do not use their independent side to flex those muscles and insist on a higher salary. Let's look at another example to highlight this point. So, how about this example? Asian Americans make about 5% of the population, yet they fill 15 to 45% of all the undergraduate university seats in top universities. Yet, they're only about 1 to 4% of the US Fortune 500 CEOs and are about 2% of US Congress. Why is that? Well, we start to see the clash of interdependence and independence at play here. In many Asian cultures, leadership takes the form of being able to stay silent, to listen, to pay attention, and see what the group is thinking and feeling. However, if you look in the West, especially in US culture, leading involves being a little bit excited and taking the charge and leading the team, right? And talking more and being a little bit more vocal. So if you think about it, the interdependent side, which is what you see in the East, means being smart has to do with being able to be calm and listen. But on the West and the independent side, being smart has to do with being higher energy and more vocal and being able to speak and take charge. Can we see the clash here? See what I did there? I used the book title in my point. So guess what happens to Asian Americans? Very much what happens to women when they come up to promotions. They're not able to use their independent selves to flex those muscles and move up the hierarchy in the business world because we are here in the West, and that focuses on qualities and strengths that are more independent versus interdependent. Starting to get the picture? And you see, when those things don't happen, everyone loses. Because aside from what research shows that, yeah, having a more diverse group of people working on a problem is actually better. I'm going to reference my dear mentor who passed this last year, Chris House, who I'll be writing a fantastic article on his life and releasing it hopefully early next week. But Chris House used to say when he would look for a team of people to put together, he wanted to have a diverse background from everybody, not only culturally, but also intellectually, their training, their academia, their biases, how they view the world, so that when he puts all these people together in a room and look at one problem, he has every single angle and perspective to evaluate that problem and solve for it in the best and most creative way. And that's what made him wildly successful, and that's why he led some of the best teams on planet Earth when it comes to taking surgical robotic technology to market. Now that you have this perspective of clash and the idea of interdependence versus independence, think of it like this. You might have this long list of life problems of people you're having issues with, your spouse, your neighbor, your coworker, and everything. And believe it or not, every single one of those are not a single piece of problems that need to be solved by itself. Actually, it's just really these two things. It's independence versus interdependence. Now, the authors lay out a fantastic and very simple framework on how to solve these problems, and it's really just 2 steps. That's right, only 2. Step number 1, lead with interdependence. And why is that important? It's because when it comes to interdependence, it means the ability to stay calm and to listen. And most specifically, listening means not listening so that you can prepare what you're about to say next after this person's done speaking. It means listening with curiosity, without bias, or as little as possible. And part of listening also means you listen to yourself. Because in your mind, you have a filter and a story of the world and the worldview of what this other person is telling you. And so you have to be very aware of those biases so that whatever that other person's communicating to you comes through very clearly and without being manipulated by your own perceptions. And step number 2 of this process is match or contrast. So if interdependence works, use interdependence in the conversation and in the interactions. If it's not working, then contrast it. Use your independent side. It's a very simple framework. Now, what I loved about this book, aside from this fantastic book cover, I do have a thing when it comes to book cover design, is that it's so well researched. And more importantly, some really interesting case studies were put together, including this, as you can see here, a way for you to score yourself to figure out whether you're more independent and interdependent. So everyone, that's the book of the week. Love the book because regardless of whether you're a new professional, a cultural psychologist, a leader of a large organization, we all have to understand how to get along better, and more importantly, to understand and appreciate our cultural differences, and more importantly, tap into those same differences and similarities within us, because we know that we can. It's all about working together to make this world that we live in better and more fun to live in, because let's face it, if we check out this map, that's just airline flights of how well we're connected. With social media and internet, we're going to have even more connections, more ways that we can clash, but more importantly, more ways that we can start to learn from each other and make the world a better place. God, that's really beautiful. So, as always, happy Wisdom Wednesday, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.